Welcome back. We've just talked about the shortage of skilled labour in our rural areas, but it's not just on our farms that we're having to import labour from offshore. This week, Labour's fisheries spokesperson David Cunliffe revealed that a New Zealand company is advertising for a fishing crew with a very particular skill. The crew must speak Russian. The boat operates in New Zealand waters, but for some reason the crew is required to read and speak Russian. And that puts almost all New Zealand fishers at a distinct disadvantage. Immigration Minister Michael Woodhouse joins me now from Dunedin. Hello, Minister. Thank you for joining us this morning. Before we get on to these issues, let me just ask you, off the back of that panel that we've just heard, do you think immigration is in essence being asked to cover here for the failures of both our employment policy and as well our education policy in this country?
Well, I think it's important to realise that the primary industries have gone through something of a dramatic change over the last generation. We're moving away from the traditional farming family model and got to much larger structures within the industry. So I think that's had an effect on the supply of labour, and there's no doubt that we're going to need to rely on migrant labour, at least in the short term. I should note, though, that the number of labour market tested work visas across the country has dropped over the last few years, and that just reflects the recessionary period we're in.
OK,
and
you say there's been a lot of change in farming, but in
hoops.
essence, you know, the way we milked cows 10, 15 years ago is pretty much the same as we milk them now.
Oh, that's true, but who does it, I think, has changed considerably, and I think there's a challenge of marketing that the government and the primary industries jointly need to improve on to make the sector more attractive to our young New Zealanders, because there's certainly, as you heard, it's not necessarily pay that's a barrier. There are barriers. Skills might be one significant barrier, mobility.
Okay.
We certainly have an issue, I think, with drug and alcohol impeding young New Zealanders getting into work here, and that's what employers are telling us, so we're trying to remove those barriers.
Also, David Cunliffe is questioning the integrity of our immigration system. Why do you need to speak Russian to work on a New Zealand boat in New Zealand waters fishing?
Well, I haven't seen the ad, so I don't want to confirm the veracity of what Mr. Cunliffe
We have some
has
ads
said.
here.
Okay.
We can show you.
What
We've got a fishing vessel crew position based from the port of Nelson. It was in the Nelson Mail, July 10th, 2013, and it distinctly asks for, and we've highlighted here, working knowledge of the Russian language. But I can also highlight some other cases to you too, because this isn't isolated. I had a quick look at Trade Me. There are 3 ads straight away that came up. In Timaru, deep-sea trawlers advertising for people fluent in both written and spoken Korean. Also in Timaru, another trawler wants Japanese speakers. In Hastings, Minister, there's an orchard that needs a supervisor and he or she must speak Thai. It seems that these ads are specifically designed to target immigrants.
Yes, well, you've heard that employers need to jump through what are quite considerable hoops in order to get approvals to employ overseas workers, and I think that would be a significant hoop to jump. That is to demonstrate to Immigration New Zealand that it would be necessary for those people to speak Russian. Now, the foreign charter vessel
though,
issue...
isn't it? Why should that be the case when we've got 6.1% unemployment? Why are we trying to get Russians on our boats and Thais running our orchards?
The fleets that are fishing in our territorial waters are many of them flagged in those countries and are probably going to have hazard notices, health and safety and engineering requirements written in those languages. So it would be necessary to have some people on the boat that had fluency in those languages. But I would be very, very interested to know how many would be required to have that. You will also be aware that we've made significant changes to the management of the foreign charter vessel fleet, where all of them are going to need to be flagged in New Zealand by 2016, and I think that will see a significant reduction in the reliance on overseas workers.
The ad that we're seeing, and granted I know you haven't seen it, but it's advertising for a cook and says that person should speak Russian as well. You know, it's pretty remarkable, isn't it, that we're importing labour when we have unemployment of 6.1%.
Yes, well, I'd like to see whether they're successful in doing that, and they would need to demonstrate that that was a requirement of the job before Immigration New Zealand would give approval for that visa. So I'll make some inquiries about that, but I'd need to be convinced that that was absolutely necessary.
Doesn't this perhaps show, Minister, that the government has failed to connect unemployed people with the jobs market?
Oh, I think quite the opposite. We are seeing a reduction in the number of labour market tested visas that are required, and there is a tension between the requirements on those employers to get labour, often seasonal labour, at short notice, with a longer term goal that industry and government needs to work on together to gain the skills and the numbers of New Zealanders who can do that job. I think the sorts of changes that we've made into skills and training, to even things like national standards, which gets our average education levels up, and the requirements for unemployed to be free of drugs and alcohol
Okay.
in order to be put forward to work are important measures. But it's going to take a few years to solve that problem.
How big is that problem? Do you think the unemployed problem, you know, it's a bit of a stereotype to say that they're all on, you know, they're all boozing it up and on drugs as well?
Yeah, I think we need to be very careful not to jump at anecdote, but the anecdotes are quite strong, and any employer will tell you that when Work and Income sends some workers to them, they will have some of those barriers. That is, they're not skilled or educated enough to do the jobs. They may have some issues with drug and alcohols or mobility. Okay. And I think those are barriers that we need to continue to work on to move so that those Kiwis are first in line for the jobs, which is the policy of this government and successive governments.
Explain to me a little bit more about this issue of who's using drugs and who's drinking alcohol and why that's a problem and what you know about this.
Well, as you heard, a lot of these agricultural roles require the use of some equipment that's very technological and can be dangerous if you're doing baleage or even in dairy farming. And it is necessary for those people who are working in those roles to be competent to work and obviously free of drugs and alcohol. I don't think that's an unreasonable expectation to have of our workforce.
No, not at all. But clearly you think that there's quite a few people who are using drugs and alcohol and who therefore can't operate machinery.
Well, it is hard to measure, and as you know, we've brought in place some changes to the requirements in the social development area for people to be available for work, and being available for work means being free of those recreational drugs.
OK, why don't you incentivise people? Why doesn't the government incentivise people to get off benefits and into work by raising the minimum wage?
Well, we have every single year since we became government.
OK, but at the moment you get $384 a week on the dole. If you work and earn the minimum wage, you'll get an extra $30 more a day. I mean, that would probably encourage, well, me to sit at home and watch the omnibus, you know. It's not really forcing people out to work, is it, or encouraging them to get into work?
Look, it's one of the questions that I've asked the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment to advise me on, and that is the degree to which wages is a form of labour market interference, where migrant workers might be paid less wages than New Zealanders. And at the moment, I haven't seen any evidence that that's the case.
Well, there has been some suggestion that they're being exploited.
Yes, but there are a number of New Zealanders working side by side with migrant labour and earning the same rates of pay. I haven't seen any evidence that migrant workers are being paid less than New Zealanders. So, and you've also heard that that in many of those industries, pay is not the issue. So I think what we need to do is work with industry to understand what are the barriers to employing young New Zealanders and remove them. Well, that's going to take some time, and therefore we will continue to need to rely on migrant labour. But I would be very disappointed to think that the industries that are the backbone of this economy would have a permanent need for overseas workers.
Well, certainly that's what they've suggested earlier in this panel, haven't they? You talk about, you know, strategies and what have you, and working out how this can happen. Do you get together with the Minister of Labour, with the Minister of Economic Development, and perhaps strategise how you can start filling these positions with New Zealand workers?
Absolutely we do, and one of the government's business growth agenda goals is skilled and safe workplaces. So I meet regularly with Minister Joyce and Minister Bridges to work through the issues that may be barriers to having more skilled and more safe workplaces. And there's very active dialogue going on right across the ministries, and I think it's one of the real benefits of having the ministries that joined together last year to form the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, that they're talking much, much more together about these very issues. OK,
another area where we're seeing a large number of immigrant workers, it's like the United Nations at the moment down in Christchurch for the rebuild. This week, Arrow joined up with, I think it's the largest Chinese state construction engineering company. It's huge. This is a massive company, over 120,000 staff, revenues of more than $100 billion a year. They've joined forces to do work on the rebuild in Christchurch. Does that agreement allow for Chinese workers to come into Christchurch as well?
Quite possibly. And there is no doubt in my mind that the rebuild is going to require a significant amount of migrant labour. Best estimates are that we're going to need 35,000 construction workers to assist with the rebuild over the next few years. We've probably got about 18,000. So we're working on multiple fronts. Firstly, to upskill our workforce in the construction sector to provide as many places as we can in our polytechs and with ITOs. But there's no doubt we're going to need overseas workers.
Is that what made this deal with Arrow and this Chinese construction company attractive, the fact that it gave you access to the Chinese labour market?
Well, there's no change to the basic core principles, and that is we still have a Kiwis First policy for Christchurch. We've set up, the Social Development Ministry and Immigration New Zealand have set up a skills and employment hub which requires all employers who want to employ overseas workers to register with them to demonstrate that there aren't available New Zealanders to do the job before work visas are extended. But I have no doubt that there will be a significant cohort of overseas workers to assist with the Canterbury rebuild. It's the scale of it is going to require that.
In February 2011, when that earthquake hit, the government would have known instantly that there was going to be, surely, a great shortage in labour. What's been done to help meet that skill shortage that we're now facing now? Why are we hopping off to China when we've got 6.1% unemployment?
Oh, I think a tremendous amount of work is being done to make sure that we have the necessary skills. Well, we're increasing the number of places in the trades in our polytechs. We're working with ITOs to make sure apprenticeship training positions are absolutely filled, and they've been increased. We're encouraging employers to connect with those tertiary institutions to make sure that work experience is gained as those people are learning their trades. And we're ensuring that even the lower skilled trades, the hammer hands and so on, are able to get jobs in the Christchurch area. I think the bow wave is still to come. It's probably going to be over the next 6 to 12 months. And there will be plenty of opportunities for young New Zealanders to gain employment in Christchurch.
So you think we're about 17,000 jobs short, is that right?
It would be naive to think that we wouldn't be able to require on migrant labour. Yeah, I don't know the exact number, but at the moment it could be as many as that.
And how many of those positions will be filled by Chinese workers?
Well, I don't know. That will depend on the skills that they bring and their ability to speak English and all of the other requirements that overseas workers are going to fulfil. We'll also have, I think, a high number of working holiday makers that are not labour market tested who will come to Christchurch and work in the construction sector and be part of what I think will be a very special rebuild. So, yeah, it's going to be a pretty cosmopolitan place probably for the next 15 years.
All right, Michael Woodhouse, Immigration Minister, thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks, Rachel.